Yes, guys, welcome back to the LG Fitness Podcast. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good day, week, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're listening to this. I very much appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to me ramble on about life and fitness and stuff. So, yeah, thank you very much. If you've enjoyed the podcast so far, we have just passed 100 listens on a podcast. So very much appreciate all of you guys that have been tuning in. If you have tuned in and you've left a review, then I very much appreciate you. I appreciate everyone that has listened to it. Those that have left a review, I appreciate you even more. If you haven't left a review and you've enjoyed it, then please do leave it a review and let us share the podcast with more people. Let's get to 200 listens. That would be incredible. So yeah, thank you very much for all of you guys that have been tuning in. I very much appreciate it. It's a little bit surreal that people actually tune in to listen to me talk and ramble on. So yeah, appreciate it very much. So like I have been doing on the past couple of podcasts, is giving you a little bit of an update on my training routine. So for those of you that don't know, I'm looking to try and run a PB 5K, which currently stands at 21:37 is my personal best. I did a test 5K 2 weeks ago and ran it in 22:40, something like that, around that, give or take a couple of seconds. Can't remember exactly. I knew I had to knock around about a minute off the time over the next, well, however long it takes. I'm not too sure how long it's going to take, to be honest, but we're just going to give it a go and see where we get to. So this week, if you've sort of followed my Instagram, then I've taken a bit of a deload from training. And essentially a deload is where you reduce the intensity of your training. So you look to reduce the weights, you look to reduce the intensity slightly. Same with your running, like you're not going to run as hard and things like that. So it's taking a deload just to allow your body to recover. As you can imagine, as you're training hard, so if you're training with a decent level of intensity and a decent level of consistency, over time, your body is going to accumulate fatigue. And in order to get rid of that fatigue, you need to make sure that you're recovering. Now, obviously, making sure that your recovery is good from a sleep perspective and a food perspective is very key. And to be honest, my recovery over the last 5 or 6 weeks of training in terms of sleeping well, sleeping ideally, you'd want to be sleeping, 7 to 9 hours. I've probably been averaging on the low end. Probably some of my better nights were 7 hours, and then there's been a few that have been 5, 6. So from a recovery standpoint, it's not been great. And from a food standpoint, it's not been particularly great either. Not really been tracking, focused more on the training side of things, and obviously work and things like that have obviously been more of a priority. Now, that has meant that I've needed to take a little bit of a deload just to prioritize that recovery. As I said, your body is going to accumulate fatigue with hard training. Over time, your body will accumulate fatigue. Even if your recovery is good, then your body will still accumulate fatigue. Obviously, it will accumulate it. I've said accumulate far too many times now. That's starting to sound like not a real word. Yeah, accumulate. Anyway, so your body will obviously accumulate, say that again, less fatigue over time if your recovery is in a good place. Obviously, if your recovery is terrible, then you're going to have a lot more fatigue build up over time than if your recovery was good. And same for your training. If you train really hard, then your fatigue is going to increase much quicker than if your training was not as hard. If you did 1 run a week compared to 5 runs a week, then fatigue is going to build much quicker if you're doing 5 runs a week. Now, the key with this is finding the balance of how do you get enough progress without building too much fatigue. And again, that's something that you sort of have to work out with your training. So again, you don't want your training to be too easy that it takes ages and ages for you to see progress. You don't want it to be too hard that you have to consistently take breaks all the time. Now, for me, like I said, it's been about 5 weeks and I've needed to take a deload. Now, that is purely because my recovery's not been a good place. My food has not been very consistent. I've probably not been eating enough, or certainly not enough of like good quality foods anyway. And sleep has not been as good either. So ideally, I'd want to be maybe taking like a slight deload every 8 weeks potentially. And again, it depends, varies on the level of training, but the level of training that I'm doing now, I wouldn't expect to be taking a deload 5 weeks in. I'd be expected to taking it 8, 10, maybe even 12 weeks in. But like I said, obviously I've had to do that because of my poor recovery over the last few weeks. Now, recovery is very, very important for growth, right? So if your goal is to build muscle, if your goal is to make progress in any sort of sporting venture, or if you're looking to improve your cardio, or you're looking to run a marathon, run a half marathon, whatever it is, recovery is so, so important. And it's often very much neglected because many people have this idea that the more I do, the better. And it's true up until a point. If you can remember those curves at school, and it's essentially the law of diminishing returns, right? So it might be going from one session to two sessions gives you a massive boost in your ability to make progress. It might be 4 times greater from going from 1 to 2 sessions. 2 to 3 sessions, again, will give you another decent boost. So that might give you a 2.5 times boost. Another significant boost from 2 to 3 sessions, but not quite as significant as going from 1 to 2. Going from 3 to 4, again, might give you a decent boost in your training. Going from 4 to 5, maybe might give you a little bit extra. Going from 5 to 6, probably minimal, if anything, depending on the individual. Going from 6 to 7, again, you're probably going to start to see no improvement on your results, or potentially less results as a result. And that is just purely because the amount of fatigue that you're going to build is going to increase and increase, which means you're going to either need to take a break. Potentially, you may be at risk of getting injured and things like that, which is obviously something that you don't want to do. So, managing recovery, making sure that you're sleeping enough, making sure that you're eating enough is super, super important if you want to get results, if you want to progress and get in better shape, build more muscle, get fitter, get stronger, whatever it is that you are looking to achieve. So, really, really, really important that you prioritize recovery. Now, this leads me on nicely to sort of what I want to talk about today. And this is a question that I have been asked many, many times since I've been a PT, probably even before I was a PT. Now, the question is, should I be doing stretching? Now, the reason this sort of segues on quite nicely is because there's normally 3 reasons I find that people want to stretch. And one of them is for recovery purposes. And it makes sense, right? I'll stretch, less fatigue or less soreness and things like that. So it makes sense from that standpoint that, people will ask about stretching. Also, the other couple of reasons is usually around improving their flexibility and injury prevention. Those are normally the 3 things that, or the most common things that people normally ask about when they're talking about stretching. It's prevention of injury, it's flexibility, and obviously recovery that we've sort of spoke about just now. Now, when it comes to stretching, in fact, when it comes to any exercise or any like protocol or whatever, when it comes to that, what you need to ask yourself is, what is the goal? So, what is the goal of the exercise? What is the goal of stretching? What is it that I want to get out of it? So, like we just spoke about, there's normally 3 reasons why a lot of people will want to stretch. It's flexibility, it's injury prevention, it's recovery. Now, if we break each of those down, and let's start with recovery as we've just been talking about it. If I was to stretch over the last 5 weeks, where my sleep has been poor, my nutrition has also not been as good as it could have been. Stretching is going to do very, very little in terms of recovery. Now, it might make me feel a little bit better in terms of muscle soreness and things like that. It might help to reduce the soreness that I feel, but just because you reduce the soreness doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually recovering better. And this is where a lot of people mistake recovery for just feeling good. So this is where like cold and heat exposure. Now, if you're an athlete, or if you're even if you play football or you play a sport or something like that, and you do say you train one day and then the next day you've got a game or something like that. Now, this is where like ice and heat and stretching and things like that can almost numb that soreness so that then you can perform at your best the following day or whatever it is. So if you did say, I don't know, say you trained legs on a Monday, I don't know why you do this, by the way, but let's say, for example, you train legs on a Monday and on Tuesday or Wednesday you had a game. Now, what you could do is do a bit of stretching. You could do a bit of ice and heat. And what that does is help you reduce that soreness for the next day by just reducing the inflammation, which is essentially the recovery process. The recovery process is sort of not necessarily meant to make you feel sore, but essentially that is part of it. Now, by stretching, doing cold and stuff like that, essentially you're turning off all those systems in order for you to not feel it, in order for you to then go and perform. Now, in terms of a recovery perspective, that's not recovering you quicker or overall improving your level of recovery. What it's doing is just allowing you to perform, which is not a bad thing. But understand from a recovery perspective, it's not giving you that recovery that you think it does. So when it comes to recovery and stretching, like I said, if you're sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, if you're not eating a decent diet with enough food's a key one as well, because this is where most people fall down, is especially if you're trying to diet and you're trying to get in better shape, most people will undereat significantly, too much. So when you create a deficit, it should only be a moderate deficit. You should still be eating enough food, getting enough nutrients. Now, obviously, if you are in a deficit, then naturally recovery will be a little bit slower than if you're in maintenance or a surplus. But making sure that you're eating enough food is key. Making sure that you're getting enough sleep is key for recovery. Now, if you're then trying to add in more stretching on top of what you're doing, then I'd argue that you're not helping the recovery process. Recovery isn't about adding more, and recovery is not about doing more. It's about doing less. So if we look at it from a nervous system perspective, and I think I spoke about this before, about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. I spoke about this in the stress podcast, which if you haven't listened to that, go give that a listen. Now, training, exercise, things like that are going to put you in this sympathetic state, this fight or flight dominance, which is perfect for that in terms of performance, in terms of things like that. That's where we want to be. Now, in order to recover and in order to recover properly, we need to be promoting this parasympathetic dominance. So this is doing activities that relax us, that help us feel chilled, that help bring our blood pressure down, that help bring our heart rate down, all things like that, all that sort of good stuff. That's what we want to promote. That's what we want to promote in order to recover. Now, if you find stretching something that you don't particularly enjoy doing and you find it low-key stressful, then adding more stretching is not helping you recover. If you find stretching relaxing, if you find that you perceive it to be a relaxing activity, then yes, potentially having a little bit of extra stretching is going to help you. In terms of what stretching is doing from a muscular perspective, is not necessarily going to help you recover, like I've spoke about. Now, if we take a look at the other two examples. So we've obviously touched on recovery. If we touch on, say, injury prevention and flexibility next. Now, when we look at injury prevention, now, again, from a central nervous system perspective, a lot of people will say, we'll use the hamstrings as an example because many people have tight hamstrings, right? And many people will say, right, I want to get my hamstrings like more flexible. Now, what you have to understand is, from a nervous system perspective, when you feel that tightness in the muscle, that is essentially your nervous system. As you stretch that muscle, your nervous system is kicking into gear and saying, stop what you're doing. Do not stretch this muscle any further. We do not feel stable here. We do not feel strong here. So stop before this hamstring tears clean off the bone. That is your nervous system in place. So how can we then get a little bit more flexible? Can we get more flexible through stretching? Yes. What is another way that we can stretch? Strength training. So if we look at something like an RDL, for example, that is essentially a hamstring stretch that is under load. Now, you might be very advanced or you might be a beginner. And if you're a beginner, perhaps just going through some normal stretching or going through that RDL motion with minimal weight is going to help you create a little bit of strength in that hamstring, certainly in that end range of motion. So that could be a very good starter for you to stretch, essentially. So a little bit of strength training to get that muscle a little bit stronger. Over time, what you'll find is you will become more flexible with strength training. And this sort of links into injury prevention as well. Again, stretching is not necessarily going to help you reduce your risk of injury, whereas strength training, on the other hand, is potentially going to be a very, very good modality for preventing injury. If you can get your muscle stronger, certainly, like we spoke about, in those end ranges, especially if you're playing sport and things like that. If you can imagine sprinting, for example, like that's the most likely time that you're going to pull a hamstring, is when you're sprinting, end range of motion. Your hamstring is basically trying to slow you down as you sprint. And obviously that is a lot of force going through the hamstring. If your hamstrings are very, very weak, then you may potentially be at risk of injuring your hamstring. And I've had this before in the past. I've had a lot of issues a couple of years ago with my left hamstring, and it was just simply very weak. And what I did was spend a lot of time in the gym working on strengthening my hamstring, working on strengthening it, certainly in that length and range. So going through like those stretch movements. So an RDL, seated leg curl, very much helped strengthen my hamstrings. And touch wood, I haven't pulled my hamstring in a few years now. And again, it's just trying to make sure that you're keeping it strong from doing that. Now, I'm, again, like I said, stretching can help, but if you're talking about improving your flexibility through stretching, then the stretching that you're thinking of is probably not going to get you there. You've seen these people in the gym, right? You've seen them stretching after a workout, and they'll do like the hamstring stretch, and they maybe do stretch for 10 seconds, and then they'll move on to the other leg, they'll stretch for 10 seconds. And it's a quick, like 5 minute routine after a workout, and little quick stretch. And that is probably what I would recommend is sort of ideal in terms of a recovery perspective, if that makes you feel good. If that sort of type of stretching where you do 5-10 minutes and it just puts you in a nice mood and you settle down and you feel like it genuinely recovers you, relaxes you, then that's a perfect thing to do for recovery. Like I said, in terms of recovery, it's all about pushing that parasympathetic dominance. So anything that makes you feel relaxed, do it. If something doesn't make you feel relaxed, if something makes you feel very on or very aware and very, like this podcast, for example, when I'm doing this, I'm on, I'm thinking about stuff. This is not a parasympathetic dominance activity for me. For many of you, it might be. If I invited one of you on the podcast and you just came on and were just chatting and just having a laugh about things, then yeah, you'd probably find it maybe relaxing. For others, you wouldn't find this relaxing because you wouldn't want to be on camera or you wouldn't want to be talking and stuff like that. It would be very alien to you and it would be a very stressful thing for you to go through. So it's different for different people, which is really key to understand. So coming back to the flexibility side of things, if you're trying to get more flexible by simply stretching, then what you need to understand is the intensity of your stretching sessions would not be considered recovery. So you would have to be very intense with your stretching, like it would be genuinely painful to stretch to the point where you're trying to get more flexible because you're trying to elicit an adaptation. And in order for your body to adapt, you need to put your body under stress. It's just like when you go to the gym, right? In order to grow more muscle, you need to put the body under stress and give it a reason to grow, which is why we look at trying to train, 0 to 3 reps in reserve, which is hard. Like those reps, those last few reps are very, very difficult to complete. And that is a very stressful thing for the body, which is a good thing if you want to adapt and you want to grow. So it comes down to the same sort of thing with stretching, is if you're trying to get more flexible, then why not kill two birds with one stone in terms of a strength perspective? You can get stronger and stretch at the same time. You can get more flexible from doing all of that. If your goal is simply flexibility, then yes, great. You can stretch 100% and you can do that. But again, understand that it's going to be very intense stretching that you're going to need to do, which is a sympathetic state that you're going to put yourself in. So from a recovery standpoint, it's not going to be the best thing. Now, again, this all depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. What is your goal? Are you, like I said, are you stretching to recover? Are you stretching to be more flexible? Are you stretching? What are you stretching for? Always ask yourself when it comes to exercise, when it comes to anything, right, what is the goal? What am I trying to achieve out of this? Is it worth, and for many of you, it probably isn't worth spending an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes at the end of your session. You've probably already got a busy lifestyle, you've got work, you've got kids, things like that. Is it worth doing an hour in the gym followed by 20 minutes extra of stretching, 20 minutes extra of your day that you have to spend stretching from a recovery standpoint, which we said, the best way to recover is by sleep and eating. Would you rather just go home and relax after your gym session? That's probably a better form of recovery. In terms of a flexibility perspective, again, if you're doing strength training and you're doing lengthened range exercises, so like I said, like RDLs for hamstrings, behind the head tricep extensions for your tricep, anything that's lengthening your muscles, again, like squats, for example, is going to lengthen the quads, lengthen the glutes. It's going to stretch those muscles. If you're already doing that sort of stuff and you want to get more flexible, is adding stretching into that going to help you? Maybe. Is it worth it? Maybe not. And then finally, from an injury prevention standpoint, again, similar sort of thing from the strength training. If you're already strength training, then how much is it worth doing additional stretching in order to get those benefits? And very much coming right back to the start in terms of adding more and what you get in return, that law of diminishing returns is, am I adding stretching in? Am I getting enough back to warrant me doing that? Or am I just better off, focusing on my strength training, focusing on good recovery in terms of sleep, eating, and having a little bit more time and not bothering stretching? Now, I can't make that decision for you. That's totally down to you. But in terms of, like I said at the start, is am I adding more and I'm getting way less in return? So ultimately, you have to decide, is it worth it for you? Am I getting the results that I really want from adding an additional 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40, 50 minutes extra a week of stretching or whatever it may be? Now, I hope this podcast was helpful. Hope it was useful. If you have any questions on stretching, if you have any questions on exercise, nutrition, whatever it may be, please reach out, drop me a message. You can find me on Instagram at Lewis Graham Coaching. You can drop me an email if you've got any questions for the podcast, lewis@lewisgrahamfitness.co.uk, or you can visit my website, which is www.lewisgrahamfitness.co.uk. Nearly fucked that up. Well, I did fuck it up, let's be real. Yes, I hope you enjoyed this episode. As I said at the start, if you're enjoying these episodes, please leave a review. It's massively helpful. Let's get overall listens up to 200 in the next few shows. That would be incredible. But thanks again for listening. Really appreciate you. I hope you have a great day, and I'll speak to you on the next one. Take care.